The blood came first. It arrived in a single hot spatter across the cracked asphalt of an empty Kuoh side street, 3 drops that hissed where they struck and steamed under the street lamps. And then the man came with it, folding out of nothing, the way smoke unfolds from a snuffed candle. All at once, and from no direction at all. He landed in a crouch, one gloved hand pressed flat to the ground to steady himself. The other held a weapon that should not have existed, a great serrated blade, folded and hinged, its edge black with old use and slick with something that was not rust. For a long moment, he did not move. He breathed, slow, deliberate, the breathing of a man who had learned that the first thing to do in any new place was to listen for what wanted to kill him. Rain from an hour ago still glazed the road. A vending machine hummed against a wall. Somewhere far off a train sighed across its rails and was gone. Ordinary sounds, sane sounds. The kind of sounds he had stopped believing in a long time ago. Behind him, with far more grace, the doll stepped through. She did not fall. She simply was there, one moment absent, and the next standing on the wet street in her pale dress, her porcelain hands folded before her, her hair the colorless silver of moonlight on bone. Her eyes opened slowly, and where the hunter's every sense had snapped taut in readiness, hers filled instead with something soft and stunned, because for the first time since her making, the ground beneath her feet was not the gray soil of the hunter's dream. It was cold. It was solid. It was real. Air moved against her cheek that no one had willed to move. A world breathed around her that no one dreamed. "Good Hunter," she said quietly, and her voice was gentle music in the empty street. "This place, it is not the dream." He rose from his crouch. His eyes, the only part of him truly visible beneath the wide black hat and the layered coat and the cloth wound across his lower face, moved once across the rooftops, the wires, the strange bright signs in a script he did not know. No blood-drunk beasts, no church bells tolling the hunt, no moon swollen huge and red over the rooftops of Yharnam. Just a small, sleeping town under an ordinary sky. He said nothing. He rarely did. But his grip on the cleaver eased, by a fraction, and the doll understood him as she always had. They had, both of them, stepped out of one nightmare and into a world that did not yet know it had let them in. It did not stay quiet for long. Half a mile away, in the old schoolhouse that Rias Gremory's peerage claimed as their own, the crimson-haired heir of the Gremory clan came awake between one heartbeat and the next. She sat up on the sofa where she'd been reading, and the book slid from her lap unnoticed. Across the room, Akino Himejima had gone very still, her teacup halfway to her lips. Koneko's small hands had closed into fists. All 3 of them had felt it at the same instant. A pressure, a wrongness, rolling out across the town like a ring of cold water spreading from a dropped stone. "You felt that," Rias said. It was not a question. "Ara," Akeno murmured, setting the cup down with a soft click. Her usual teasing warmth had thinned to something watchful. "I felt it, but I don't know what I felt, President. It's not a devil. It's not a fallen angel." She tilted her head, and her violet eyes narrowed. "It isn't holy either. It isn't anything I have a word for." Koneko spoke without looking up. Her voice, as always, was flat and small. "It smells like blood, and like an animal. And like—" She paused, and for the first time in a long while, the tiny Nekosho looked genuinely unsettled, like something old, older than the underworld. Rias was already on her feet, already reaching for the crimson power that answered her like a loyal hound. In the fragile season Kuoh had entered, the exorcists arriving with their broken Excaliburs, Kiba's old wound reopening, the fallen angel Kokabiel's shadow lengthening over everything. A new and unreadable power was the last thing the delicate balance needed. She thought of the peace that Surzex and the others were trying to build, that thread of a thing not yet strong enough to bear weight, and she thought, "Not now. Please, not now. Wake Yusei and the others," she said. "Whatever that is, it's in my territory. I want to see it before it decides what it wants to be." There was a moment, roughly then, while Rias gathered her peerage and the hunter stood listening in the empty street, that belongs less to them than to you, the one watching this unfold. So let it be said plainly, and then we'll return to the blood. If stories like this one are worth your time, the channel lives on you telling it where to go next. Subscribe and drop a comment with any universe and any character you want dropped into a world that has no idea what to do with them. This particular nightmare, the hunter and his doll walking into a town run by devils, came straight from Caleb Tisfay, who named it and got it made. Every story here is written by me, and the best ones come from names in that comment section. Now, back to Kuoh, where something is about to find the hunter before the devils do. The exorcist found them first. She came down the side street at a wary half-run, a young woman with blue-tinted hair and the hard, clean bearing of the church about her, a heavy wrapped bundle across her back that anyone with holy sight would have recognized as a fragment of Excalibur. Zenobia Quarta had been walking Kuoh's night on the church's business, hunting stolen holy swords and the fallen who'd taken them, when the same wrongness that woke the devils had turned her south. She had expected a fallen angel. She had prepared her prayers for a fallen angel. She had not prepared for this. She rounded the corner and stopped dead, and her hand went to the wrapping of her blade on pure instinct, because what stood in the streetlight was a man drenched in old blood, wreathed in an aura that made the small hairs on her arms rise, holding a weapon of a shape God had never sanctioned. Her exorcist senses, honed since childhood to read the holy and the unholy, reached out to categorize him, and found nothing they could hold. He was not a devil. There was none of that sulfur and shadow signature the church taught its children to loathe. He was not astray. He was not fallen. No black wings, no light spear malice. But neither was he holy, neither was he human. In any way she understood the word, because no human aura had ever pressed against her soul, like a cold hand laid flat over her heart. He simply stood outside every box she had. And standing beside him, impossibly, was a doll the size of a woman, made of porcelain and grace, watching Zenobia with pale, untroubled eyes. "In the name of God," Zenobia said, and her voice did not shake, because she had trained too long to let it, but her knuckles were white on the wrapped hilt. "What are you?" The hunter looked at her. He did not answer, of course, but he saw her, and here was the thing Zenobia could not know, could never have known. The hunter had drunk deep of insight in the long nights of Yharnam, had gazed on things that unmade lesser minds, and his eyes now perceived layers of the world that ordinary sight was mercifully blind to. He looked at the young exorcist and saw the sword shard on her back for what it truly was, saw the faint radiance clinging to her that the church would call blessing, and understood in an instant, the light here is a weapon, and she carries a piece of one. In Yharnam, everyone he met was either prey, hunter, or something wearing a human face over a hunger. He had learned to read strangers the way other men read weather. This one held herself like a soldier and pointed a holy edge at his heart. That told him everything he needed. His thumb shifted on the cleaver's grip. Metal whispered as the blade began, very slightly, to unfold. "Please." The doll's voice cut across the tension like cool water. She had stepped forward, placing herself with serene deliberation half between them, her porcelain hands lifting in a gesture of peace. "Good Hunter, she is afraid, not cruel. And you." She turned her ageless gaze on Zenobia, and something in that gentle, sorrowful regard made the exorcist's breath catch. "You carry a weapon against monsters, and you have found something you do not understand, and mistaken the two. It is a very old mistake. Please do not make it tonight." Zenovia's eyes flicked between them, the silent killer and the speaking doll, and her disciplined mind reeled trying to fit them into any doctrine she'd been taught. Angels did not look like this. Devils did not look like this. There was no page in any of her books for a porcelain woman who spoke of mercy while a blood-soaked man beside her decided whether to kill. And then the night lit crimson. The Gremory teleportation circle bloomed across the street in a wash of scarlet light, its intricate sigils turning, and out of it stepped the devils, Rias at the center like a queen taking a throne, Aquino at her right with lightning already sparking at her fingertips, Kaneko small and coiled at her left, the blonde swordsman Kiba with his hand on his hilt and his eyes hard, and behind them a brown-haired boy with a gauntlet on his left arm who was very obviously trying to look braver than he felt. For a heartbeat, everyone in the street understood the geometry of the moment perfectly. An exorcist of the church, a peerage of devils, and between them, in the crossfire of two ancient enemies, who each had every reason to distrust the other, stood a man from no faction at all, and the doll who loved him. "Well," Rias said, her crimson power curling around her like a living cloak, her gaze fixed unerringly on the hunter, because he was the wrongness. He was the pressure that had woken her from across the town. "This is my territory. And you," her eyes swept him, the blood, the coat, the terrible unfolding blade, the aura that answered none of her questions, "are the most interesting problem I've had in a very long time." The hunter's gaze moved slowly across all of them, the exorcist with her holy shard, the crimson-haired devil, and the storm-handed woman beside her. The small girl whose stillness reminded him, unpleasantly, of predators, the swordsman, whose hatred he could smell like ozone, and the frightened boy with the strange gauntlet, a gauntlet that, to the hunter's insight-sharpened sight, had a low ember of something ancient sleeping inside it, an old red thing curled in slumber. He filed that away. In Yharnam, the quiet ones and the sleeping things were always the ones that killed you. He said nothing. The doll spoke for him, her voice carrying soft and clear across the ring of drawn power. "We mean no harm to this town," she said. "We are lost. We have crossed from a place very far from here. A dream, if you would understand it, that touches many worlds at their edges. The Good Hunter does not want your blood." A pause, and the faintest, saddest smile touched her porcelain lips. "Though he will spend it freely, if you make him." Silence held the street. Rain-glazed asphalt gleamed under the lamps. Somewhere the train sighed again, oblivious. Then the boy with the gauntlet, Issei, broke it, because someone always does. He said, looking between the devils and the exorcist and the bloody man and the walking, talking doll. "Does anybody know what's going on? Because I feel like I missed a meeting." Nobody laughed, but the tension cracked, just slightly, and in that crack, Rias made a decision that would reshape the fragile peace of three factions and set a hunt in motion that not even the gods had a treaty for. "You're coming with us," she told the hunter and the doll. "It was not a request. Both of you, before something worse than me finds you first." Her eyes flicked to Zenobia, cool and challenging. "The church can wait its turn." Zenovia's grip tightened on her Excalibur fragment. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to strike, to report to her superiors that something outside all doctrine walked in Kuoh, and every ounce of her training told her that starting a fight here, outnumbered, against an enemy she could not read, was how exorcists died young. The hunter, for his part, watched the Crimson Devil's outstretched invitation, the way he watched everything, as a door that might lead to answers, and might lead to teeth. He glanced once at the doll. She inclined her head, gentle as ever. "Where you go, Good Hunter," she said, "I will follow, as I always have." He sheathed the cleaver, the great blade folding closed with a sound like a guillotine reset, and stepped forward into the crimson light. And as the Gremory circle swallowed the strange pair and the wary devils together, high above Kuoh, where the ordinary sky hid extraordinary things, something with too many eyes turned its attention toward a town that had just acquired a man who could not die, and a doll dreamed into waking. The hunt had found a new world. It did not yet know it had begun. The old schoolhouse smelled of tea and dust and, faintly now, of blood. The hunter stood near the tall windows of the occult research club room and did not sit, though a chair had been offered. He had positioned himself, without seeming to, where he could see both doors and the largest window at once, the corner of a man who had learned that rooms were traps, and every trap had a way out for those who found it first. The doll had accepted the offered seat with grave courtesy, and sat now with her hands folded in her lap, luminous and out of place among the worn Victorian furniture, drawing every eye in the room whether its owner willed it or not. Rias sat behind her desk. Her peerage arranged themselves around her in the loose, practiced formation of people who had fought together, Aquino at her shoulder, Koneko perched on the sofa arm, Kiba near the door with his careful eyes, Issei hovering somewhere between curiosity and self-preservation. The blonde girl who'd been introduced as Asia sat closest to the doll, having drifted there almost helplessly, the way a child drifts toward something beautiful. And Zenobia stood apart by the far wall, arms folded, Excalibur fragment still wrapped across her back. She had come, not as a guest, she'd made that clear, but because leaving these two out of her sight was worse than sitting in a room full of devils, an uneasy truce for an uneasy night. "So," Rias said, lacing her fingers together. Her tone was pleasant. Her eyes were not. "Let's start with the simple things. You crossed from another world. You call it a dream. And your aura," she considered the hunter with the frank assessment of a woman appraising a weapon she might have to use or face, "doesn't register as anything my kind has a name for." That last part is what I'd very much like to understand, because in my experience, unknown things in this town lately have a way of trying to kill everyone. The hunter looked at her, said nothing. The doll answered, as she would answer for him all night, her voice filling the silence like water finding its level. "He does not speak often. It is not discourtesy. Where he comes from, words were rarely worth the breath. The things he hunted did not negotiate." She let that settle, and Issei visibly swallowed. "But I will tell you what I can, and I will tell you truly, because you have shown us shelter, and I would repay that with honesty." "Please do," Aquino said, and there was steel under the silk of it. "He is a hunter," the doll began. "In his world there was a city, and in that city a sickness took root, a plague carried in blood, that turned men into beasts, and beasts into worse things, and worse things into beings that touched the sky. The hunters were those who took up arms against that tide, night after night, so that others might live to see a morning that, too often, never came." Her pale hands shifted slightly in her lap. "He was the last, and the best of them. He hunted through a night that would not end, against horrors that broke lesser minds merely to look upon, and he did not stop. He never stops. It is the only prayer he knows." The room was very quiet. "And you?" Rias asked, and her voice had gentled a fraction despite herself, drawn like all of them toward the sad music of the doll's account. "What are you, to him?" The doll was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, there was something in it that even the hunter turned his head slightly to hear. "I was made," she said simply, "fashioned in the likeness of a woman he never knew, by a hand long gone, and given purpose in a place between waking and sleep, a refuge the hunters return to when they fall, so that falling is not the end. I tended that place. I tended him. When the hunt broke him, I mended what could be mended. When he died," she said the word without weight, as a plain fact, "he woke again where I waited, and I sent him back into the dark, because that was what he needed of me, and I would deny him nothing." Her gaze lowered. "I never walked in a waking world before tonight. I did not know the ground could be cold. I did not know air could move on its own." A pause. "It is very beautiful, and very strange." Asia beside her made a small sound, not quite a sob, but close. "That's so sad," the blonde girl whispered. "You only ever knew that place. You only ever knew him." "It was not sad," the doll said, and turned to her with something that might, on a human face, have been a smile. "It was the whole of my world, and I was content in it. But I will not pretend that this," she lifted her eyes to the window, to the strange sleeping town beyond, "does not stir something in me I have no name for." Rias exchanged a glance with Aquino. A dozen unspoken calculations passed between them. It was Kaneko who cut to the marrow, in her flat little voice, without moving from her perch. "You said he dies, and wakes up. That's what you meant." Her amber eyes fixed on the hunter. "You can't be killed." The doll inclined her head. "Death does not hold him, not truly. So long as the dream endures, and it endures, he returns. It is why he does not fear the blade. It is why he is what he is." The temperature in the room dropped by several degrees. That had nothing to do with the night. Because every devil in that room understood, instantly and completely, what such a thing meant. Their entire world ran on power and the threat of its use, on the knowledge that even the strongest could, given enough force, be ended. The Satans held their thrones because they could be challenged and had never been beaten. The whole delicate architecture of factions and treaties and rating games rested, at its foundation, on the shared understanding that everyone present was mortal, that death was the one currency no one could refuse to spend. And here sat a man who had opted out, a man who could be cut down 1,000 times and rise 1,001, patient and tireless, and simply keep coming, until whatever he hunted was dead. "That's," Issei started, and for once his voice had no comedy in it. That's kind of terrifying, actually. Yes, the doll agreed, without apology. It is. Kiba had not spoken since the schoolhouse. He spoke now, from his place by the door, and his voice was careful in the way that careful things are stretched thin over something that wants to break. That weapon of his. He nodded toward the folded cleaver at the hunter's hip. It's not holy. It's not demonic. What kills your beasts, hunter? What edge do you bring to a thing that a light spear or a demonic blade can't touch? It was, on its surface, a swordsman's question. But there was a raw wire under it, and Rias, who knew her knight's history, who knew the Holy Sword Project had made him and murdered everyone he'd loved, who knew the wrapped Excalibur across Zenovia's back was salt in a wound that had never closed, heard the real shape of it. Kiba was a young man drowning in a hunt of his own, and he had just watched a stranger walk in, wearing the aura of a killer who had never once been stopped, and some part of him wanted to know, how? How do you become the thing that finishes the hunt? The hunter looked at Kiba for a long moment, and then, for the first time, he moved to answer, not in words. His gloved hand went to his hip, and with a single practiced motion the cleaver unfolded to its full serrated length, and in the same breath he drew the firearm at his other hip, a short blunderbuss thing of blackened metal, and held them both loosely, easily, in the low ready of a man for whom violence was as natural as breathing. He did not threaten. He simply showed, this is the blade, this is the gun, this is the shape of what I am, and his eyes, over the cloth of his mask, met Kiba's, with something that was not challenge, and was not comfort, but was, unmistakably, recognition. One hunter to another. One man who had drowned in a thing that would not end, looking at a boy just starting to drown. Kiba's breath caught. He answers your question, the doll said softly. The only way he knows. He does not hunt with holy light or demon fire. He hunts with will. The blade is only a tool. What kills the unkillable, young one, is a hunter who has decided the thing in front of him will die, and who has all the nights in the world to make it so. She paused. It is not a gift I would wish on you. I see the hunger in you. I have tended that hunger in him for longer than your kind has walked this earth. It does not end. It only ever asks for more. Kiba said nothing, but he looked away first. It was Zenobia, at last, who forced the night toward its point. This is all very moving, she said from the far wall, and though her tone was clipped, it was not cruel. She had listened, and something in her rigid certainty had bent, if not broken. But sentiment doesn't change the problem. I have a duty to the church. And the church will want to know about a man who wears no faction's mark, whose soul I cannot read, who cannot be killed, and who carries a weapon forged by nothing holy. She fixed the hunter with her hard gaze. My superiors will call you a threat. Some of them will call you a weapon to be seized, or a heresy to be destroyed. And I will not lie to them to protect a stranger. We ask no lies of you, the doll said. Good, because you won't get any. But Zenobia hesitated, and in the hesitation was the whole truth of her. Yet I've stood in this room an hour, and I've watched. She speaks of mercy. He hasn't drawn on anyone who didn't draw first. That's more than I can say for half the fallen I've hunted. Her jaw tightened. So I'll report what I saw, all of it, and I'll let my superiors decide what that means. That's the best I can offer, and it's more than my orders allow. Ria studied the exorcist with new eyes. That's fair, she said. Fairer than I expected from the church. Don't mistake it for friendship, devil, Zenobia said. But there was no venom in it now, only tiredness, and the wariness of a soldier who had just seen her map of the world proven incomplete. Rias rose from her desk then, and the movement drew the room's attention back to her, because whatever else this night had become, she was still the heir of Gremory, and this was still her territory. She looked at the hunter, the silent, blood-stained, deathless man, and at the doll beside him, luminous and lost, and she made the second decision of the night. You'll stay in Kuoh under my protection, she said, for now, not because I trust you. I don't, not yet, but because a power like yours, loose and unattached in this town, with everything that's coming, is a spark next to dry grass. Her crimson eyes hardened. And things are coming. There's a fallen angel named Kokabiel who wants to burn the peace between three factions to the ground and start the Great War over again. There are stolen holy swords in this town, and men willing to kill for them. Whatever you are, you've landed in the middle of it. So you'll stay close, and you'll stay out of trouble, until I understand you well enough to know whether you're a problem or an ally." The hunter regarded her for a long moment. Then he did something he had not done all night. He inclined his head, a small, grave nod, not obedience, acknowledgement, the nod of a man agreeing to a truce he reserved the right to end. And the doll, watching him, felt something she had no framework for at all, because in all their long years in the dream, the good hunter had answered to no one, had bowed to nothing, had walked into every night alone, and come back alone. She had never seen him accept another's roof. She wondered, with a soft and porcelain unease, what this waking world was already beginning to make of him. Outside, unseen, the thing with too many eyes drew closer to the sleeping town. And far to the east, in a place of black feathers and older grudges, a fallen angel who called himself Kokabiel felt a new pressure ripple across the supernatural map of the world, a blood and beast wrongness, where nothing should be, and smiled a smile, with far too many teeth in it. Now this, Kokabiel thought, is interesting. Grigori did not sleep, and neither did Azazel. The governor of the fallen angels sat in the dark of his private study, 3 prefectures from Kuoh Town, surrounded by the beautiful clutter of a mind that had spent millennia refusing to be bored. Half-built sacred gear replicas, star charts annotated in his own crabbed hand, fishing rods propped incongruously in one corner, and he stared at a pane of enchanted glass on which the supernatural currents of Japan were rendered as slow rivers of light. He had been watching Kuoh for weeks, Kokabiel's ambitions, the stolen Excaliburs, the Gremory heir's little peerage, the exorcists creeping in from the west, all of it drawn in threads he could read like a broadsheet. And then, 3 nights ago, a new thread had appeared, and Azazel had not slept properly since. "You're staring at it again," said Valley Lucifer from the doorway. Azazel didn't turn. The silver-haired young man who leaned there, heir to the blood of the original Lucifer, host of the White Dragon Emperor, the single strongest wielder Grigori had produced in an age, watched his mentor with the faint, cool amusement he watched most things with. "I'm studying it," Azazel corrected. "There's a difference. Come look." Valley crossed the room without hurry. On the glass, most of the supernatural signatures pulsed in colors Grigori had catalogued millennia ago. The crimson of devil power, the searing white of the holy, the ash gray of the fallen. But at the center of Kuoh Town, 2 signatures burned in a color the glass had no true rendering for, so it did the only thing it could and left them a raw, ugly wound of uncolor, a place where the map simply gave up. Even Valley, who found little worth his interest, tilted his head. "That's new. That's impossible," Azazel said, and there was a scholar's delight buried in his frustration. "I've spent 10,000 years learning the grammar of power in this world. Sacred gears, Longinus, the mechanics of the soul, how God's system parses a human into a vessel. I wrote the modern study of it, and that," he jabbed a finger at the wound of color on the glass, "doesn't fit a single rule I know. It's not a sacred gear. It's not any pantheon's divinity. It reads a little like a beast, and a little like blood arte, and a little like something from outside, from the gaps between, and none of those explanations is complete." He sat back. "Do you know how long it's been since something genuinely surprised me, Valley? You tell me constantly." "A long time." Azazel's eyes gleamed. "One of them can't be killed. Did you catch that in the observations? He's died twice in 3 nights. Once to a stray devil that tried its luck, once to a rooftop fall that should have ended anyone, and both times he was simply back, whole, an hour later. There's a mechanism there, a resurrection tied to something he calls a dream, an anchored soul space that catches him when he falls." He shook his head, half in awe, half in academic hunger. "If I could understand it, if I could reproduce even a fraction of it, do you know what that would mean? For the fallen, for anyone we've ever lost?" Vali studied the wound of color a moment longer. "You want to talk to him. I want to study him. Talking is how one begins." Azazel smiled. "And I want to do it before Kokabiel does something stupid." The temperature of the room seemed to change at the name. Vali's amusement thinned. "Kokabiel's watching it too," Vali said. It wasn't a question. "Kokabiel watches everything that might be a weapon," Azazel said grimly, and the delight drained out of him. "And he's decided that the peace I've spent centuries building is an insult to everything he is. He wants the Great War back. He wants the three factions at each other's throats until the sky bleeds. And now a deathless killer whose power answers to no holy or demonic law has fallen into his lap." Azazel rubbed his eyes. "You see the problem, a being that light spears can't easily fell, that a devil's magic reads wrong on, in the hands of a fallen angel who wants a war, that isn't a scholar's curiosity anymore. That's a match next to the powder." Vali was quiet for a moment. Then, with the flat honesty that was his single most consistent trait, "You're afraid of it." "I'm cautious of it," Azazel said. "There's a difference between those two, though you've never much cared for it." He rose, gathering his coat. "An unknown that can't die is the single most destabilizing thing that could have entered this board right now. If it can be reasoned with, and the reports say the doll speaks of mercy, so perhaps it can, then it's the most fascinating guest we've ever had, and I'd sooner have it drinking tea in my study than bleeding in Kokabiel's war. But if it can't be reasoned with," he let the sentence hang. "Then," Vali prompted, with the ghost of a smile, because he lived for the ends of sentences like that one, "then we'll all learn together just how far can't be killed goes," Azazel said, "and I'd rather not run that experiment in the middle of a town full of people." In a colder place, the experiment had already been decided. Kokabiel's stronghold was a thing of black stone and old rage, raised in a fold of space where the fallen angel could brood undisturbed on the war he felt the world had cheated him of. 10 wings of pitch feathers arched from his back as he stood over his own map of the supernatural currents, cruder than Azazel's, because Kokabiel had always been a soldier and never a scholar, but sufficient. He too had seen the wound of uncolor at the center of Kuoh. He too understood what it meant. He understood it differently. "A creature that cannot die," he murmured, and his voice carried the ancient satisfaction of a warrior who has been handed exactly the thing he prayed for. "That the light cannot fell, that the devil's magic breaks against." He laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. "Do you know what Azazel will do with it? He'll study it. He'll invite it for tea and take notes, while the world he's so proud of keeps rotting into peace." Contempt dripped from the word peace like venom. "He's forgotten what we are. We are the ones who fell because we would not bow. We are war-given wings." A lesser fallen, one of his lieutenants, shifted uneasily at the edge of the room. "Lord Kokabiel, if it cannot be killed, and it cannot be turned, is it not as much a danger to us as to them?" Kokabiel's red eyes turned on the lieutenant, and the lieutenant went very still. "I don't need to turn it," Kokabiel said softly. "I don't need it to serve me. I need it to fight." He turned back to the map, and his smile widened, and it was full of teeth. "Think, you dull thing. I move on," Kokabiel sang. "I put the Gremory brat and her little pets in mortal danger, the sister of a Satan, bleeding on the ground. I burn the exorcists' precious swords and their precious faith along with them, and into the middle of a slaughter, I loose a deathless hunter who cannot tell friend from foe, who answers to nothing, who simply kills." His wings flexed with pleasure. "The devils will blame the church will blame the fallen. Sir Lucifer will come for his sister's killers, and Michael's holy host will come for the desecrators of Excalibur, and Azazel's precious peace will drown in the blood of everyone he tried to save. And at the center of it all, an unkillable thing, hunting in the dark, that no one can stop and everyone can be made to fear." He spread his hands, as if presenting a gift to the empty air. "I don't need to win Kuoh. I need to make Kuoh a wound that won't close. The hunter is my knife." He chuckled, low and pleased. "Let Azazel have his tea. I'll have my war." The hunter, for his part, did not know that 2 of the most dangerous beings in the world had spent the night arguing over what to do with him. He knew only that he could not rest. He stood on the flat roof of the schoolhouse in the small hours, motionless against the skyline, and looked out over the sleeping town with the eyes of a man who had never once in his life believed a quiet night. Below him, the devils slept, or pretended to. Beside him, the doll stood as she always stood, patient and luminous, watching him watch the dark. "You feel it also," she said. Not a question. He didn't answer, but the tilt of his head was answer enough. "Something is coming," the doll went on softly. "I feel it in the air of this place, the way I once felt the turning of the blood moon, a gathering, a weight, moving toward this little town." Her pale eyes lifted to the eastern sky, where nothing showed, but where both of them sensed a distant, patient malice, like a storm front below the horizon. "They took you in to keep you close, these crimson children. They think you a spark they must guard against a fire." A pause, and something almost wry touched her voice. "They do not yet understand. You are not the spark, Good Hunter. You are the thing the fire will call." The hunter's gloved hand rested, unconsciously, on the folded cleaver at his hip. He had known it since the moment he'd stepped out of the tier into this too quiet street. In Yharnam, he had learned the shape of a hunt long before the hunt began, the held breath of a city that knew blood was coming, the wrongness that gathered at the edges of a night that would not end. And this town, for all its trains and its vending machines and its devil children playing at ordinary life, had that same held breath. Something out there had already decided that Kuoh would burn, and somewhere beneath the weariness that never left him, beneath the endless grinding fatigue of a man who had died 1,000 times and risen 1,001, the hunter felt the old thing stir. Not eagerness, he was too tired for eagerness, but recognition, readiness, the settling of a familiar weight onto shoulders, built to carry it. If this world wanted a hunt, then a hunter had come to it. He would be ready when the fire called. Morning came to Kuoh the way mornings do to towns that have not yet learned to be afraid, gently, ordinarily, with the light slanting gold across the rooftops and the first train sighing full of half-asleep commuters. The doll watched it happen from the schoolhouse window, and it undid something in her that no horror ever had. She had seen the blood moon rise over Yharnam. She had watched the hunter's dream burn at the end of all things, watched the flowers of that gray garden curl to ash while she cradled a hunter in her lap and sang him toward rest. She had beheld the pale scholars of the cosmos and the great swaddled infant of the wet nurse, and things that had no honest name at all. None of it had moved her the way this did. A perfectly ordinary sunrise over a perfectly ordinary town, painting the sky in colors she had no words for because in the dream the sky had never changed. "It is very beautiful," she said aloud, to no one. "It really is, isn't it?" She turned. Asia Argento stood in the doorway with 2 cups of tea held carefully, the blonde former nun hovering with the shy warmth of a girl who had decided, somewhere in the long night, that the porcelain woman was someone to be kind to. Asia crossed the room and offered one of the cups, and the doll accepted it with grave courtesy. Though she did not drink, she had no need of it, and both of them seemed to understand that the offering was the point, not the tea. "You've been watching the sunrise a long time," Asia said, settling beside her at the window. "Rias said you'd never seen a real one before, never seen a real sky." "No," the doll said. "The dream had a sky, of a kind, but it did not move. It did not warm. It was painted, and it stayed painted, world without end." She turned the cup slowly in her porcelain hands. "I did not know a sky could do things. I did not know it could change while you watched, and be one thing at dawn and another by noon, and belong to no one." Something crossed her serene features that was not quite grief and not quite wonder. In the dream, everything was for a purpose. The garden, the workshop, the tools, myself, all of it made to serve the hunt, to catch the hunters when they fell. Nothing simply was. Nothing existed only to be beautiful. Her pale eyes lifted to the gold-washed sky. "This exists only to be beautiful, and no one made it for me. And still I may look at it." A pause. "I do not have a word for what that is." Asia was quiet a moment. Then, softly, "I think the word might be free." The doll considered that. "Perhaps," she said. "I do not know if a made thing can be free. I was fashioned for a purpose, in the likeness of a woman I never was, by a hand that is dust. I have been the good hunter's comfort and his keeper, and the thing that sends him back into the dark for longer than your church has existed. That is what I am for." Her voice did not waver, but something beneath it did. "And yet this morning, watching a sky no one made for me, I felt something I was not fashioned to feel. I do not know what to do with it. Maybe you don't have to do anything with it, Asia offered. Maybe you just get to feel it. She smiled, small and earnest. I spent my whole life being told I existed for a purpose too, to heal, to serve the church, and then they threw me away for using my gift on the wrong person. Her hands tightened around her cup. For a long time I thought that meant I was broken, that a thing made for a purpose, that stops serving it, has nothing left. But it isn't true. There was still me, underneath the purpose. There was still a person who could make friends, and love people, and watch a sunrise because it's pretty. She looked at the doll with a gentle certainty that seemed far too old for her years. I think there's still a you, underneath what you were made for. And I think that's who's watching the sky right now. The doll was silent for a long moment. You are very kind, she said at last, and there was something almost fragile in it. The Good Hunter has known much cruelty, and some mercy, but very little kindness, that asked nothing back. I did not know it would feel like this. She turned the cup once more in her hands. Thank you, Asia Argento. I will remember this morning. Whatever else this world becomes to us, I will remember that on my first waking morning, someone brought me tea for no reason but kindness, and told me there was a me to drink it. Asia flushed and looked at her feet, pleased and shy, and for a little while the two of them simply sat in the gold light and watched the sky do the thing it did. The hunter did not watch the sunrise. He walked. He had left the schoolhouse before dawn with a silence the sleeping devils never heard, and he moved through Kuoh in the gray pre-light the way he had once moved through Yharnam, methodically, quartering the streets, reading the town the way other men read a page. He was not sightseeing. A hunter learned the ground before the hunt came to it, the choke points and the open killing grounds, the high places and the blind corners, the routes by which a thing might come and the routes by which the prey might flee. He memorized Kuoh bones in the dark, and by the time the first light touched the rooftops, he could have fought a war across the town, without once being lost. But that was not the only reason he walked. He walked because when he was still, he felt it more. The pressure gathering at the edge of the world, the held breath, the wrongness that his insight-sharpened senses read like a stain spreading across the sky. Something out there was coming, and it was coming here, and every instinct forged in 1,000 endless nights told him it would be soon. And there was another thing, a smaller thing, a wrong note under the larger wrongness that he could not quite place. He found it near the town's edge, where an old shrine sat forgotten beneath its trees. He stopped at the foot of the shrine steps and looked up, and for a moment the hunter, who did not startle, who had stared down horrors that unmade lesser minds, went very, very still. There was a tear in the air above the shrine. It was small, barely the length of his hand, a hairline seam in reality where the light bent wrong, where the ordinary morning gave way for an instant to a churning dark that was not the sky, and not the earth, and not any place a sane man had been. To ordinary eyes it would have been nothing, a heat shimmer, a trick of the light. But the hunter had insight, and insight is the terrible gift of seeing what is truly there, and what was truly there made the old dread coil in his gut like a serpent waking. He knew that dark. He had swum in it. It was the between place, the churning gap the scholars of his own world had called the nightmare, the space that touched all worlds at their frayed edges, where the great ones dwelt and the dream itself was moored. He had crossed through such a place to reach this world, and here it was, seeping through, a wound in the morning that should not exist. The hunt had not merely followed them here, it was bleeding through. He stood beneath the tear for a long time, watching the churning dark, and behind the cloth of his mask, his jaw set hard. He understood now, with the cold clarity of a man who had learned every lesson the hard way, what his arrival had truly done. He and the doll had not simply stepped from one world to another and closed the door behind them. They had opened something. Their crossing had thinned the veil between this waking world and the between place, and now that between place, patient, hungry, indifferent, was pressing at the thin spot like water at a cracked dam. And on the far side of that thinning veil, in the churning dark he knew too well, something had noticed. Something with too many eyes had turned toward the smell of a world it had not yet touched. The fallen angel gathering his war to the east was the fire this town could see. The thing pressing at the veil above a forgotten shrine was the fire it could not. The hunter reached up, slowly, and touched the air just below the tier. The dark churned. Cold radiated from it, a cold that had nothing to do with temperature, the cold of a vast and ancient attention brushing, incuriously, against his hand. He drew back. He did not try to close it. He did not know how. Such wounds did not answer to a blade. But he marked its place in his mind with the grim precision of a hunter marking a lair, and he turned back toward the town with a new and heavier knowledge settling onto his shoulders. He had come to this world weary, seeking only to follow an echo, and perhaps to rest. He would not rest. There was no rest for what he was. He had brought the between place to this bright and ordinary town, and now 2 hunts were coming for Kuoh, one of black wings and old rage, and one of too many eyes and no name at all, and only one man in all this world had the faintest idea that the second one existed. The Good Hunter walked back toward the schoolhouse in the gold morning light, past shopfronts opening, and children in uniforms hurrying to their trains and a sky doing the beautiful thing it did, and he carried the knowledge alone, as he had always carried everything alone. Above the forgotten shrine, the tier churned, and widened by the width of a hair, and waited. The Excalibur came for Kiba before the fallen angels did. It happened 4 nights after the hunter's arrival, in the industrial quarter at the town's western edge, a maze of dead warehouses and rusted gantries, where the stolen holy swords had gone to ground with the rogue exorcists who'd taken them. Kiba had been hunting there alone for weeks, chasing the thing that had murdered everyone he'd ever loved, and on this night his hunt and the hunters happened to cross in the dark. The night had not asked for company. The hunter had followed anyway, drawn by the same instinct that made him quarter the ground before any storm, and by something else he would not have named, a recognition of the drowning boy from the schoolhouse, walking willingly into deep water. The doll had stayed behind, at Asia's gentle insistence. So it was the 2 of them, the deathless man and the vengeful boy, when the trap closed. It closed with light. A rogue exorcist stepped from between 2 containers, silver-haired and grinning like a slit throat, and in his hand blazed a holy sword, Excalibur rapidly, the fragment of speed, its edge screaming white with the light that was death to devils. "Well, well," the exorcist sang, and his voice had the mad music of a man who'd killed for pleasure, and been paid for it besides. A little devil, all alone. And his pale eyes flicked to the hunter, and the grin faltered, just slightly, at the aura he couldn't read, and something I don't have a name for. Freed doesn't like things he can't name. Kiba's blade was already in his hand, dark demonic steel wreathed in cold. "You," he said, and the word came out cracked with a decade of hate. "You carry a piece of it, the thing that made me. The thing that killed them all." "Oh, is that what's got you crying?" Freed laughed, delighted. "The Holy Sword Project. Ha, that old thing. You're one of the little test subjects that didn't take, aren't you? One of the failures they threw in the incinerator." He rolled Excalibur's blazing edge lazily through the air. "Should have stayed dead with the rest of your batch, devil. I'll fix that oversight." And he came. Freed was fast. Excalibur rapidly made him a blur, a scream of white light stitching between the containers, and he came at Kiba with the gleeful precision of a man who genuinely loved this. Kiba met him blade to blade, and the industrial dark lit up with the clash of holy light against demonic steel, sparks fountaining, the shriek of edges that wanted to unmake each other. But Kiba was fighting through a red haze of a decade's grief, and grief makes a swordsman fast and stupid in equal measure, and Freed was neither grieving nor stupid. He was simply a monster who enjoyed his work. The holy blade slipped past Kiba's guard and opened a line of white agony across the knight's ribs. Kiba staggered. Holy light was poison to a devil. The wound smoked, sizzling, and Kiba's next parry came a half-beat slow. Freed's grin widened. He drew back for the killing thrust, and the hunter shot him. The blunderbuss roared in the dark, a spray of quicksilver shot catching Freed full in the shoulder, and the rogue exorcist was flung sideways off his feet with a screech of surprise and pain. It should not have staggered a man wielding Excalibur, but the hunter's firearm was not a devil's weapon or a holy one, and Freed's whole mad calculus of what could and couldn't touch him did not account for a thing that fit no category. He hit a container with a clang and rolled up snarling, the grin gone, blood, his own, sheeting down his arm. "What?" Freed spat. "Are you?" The hunter stepped between Freed and the wounded knight, unhurried, and unfolded the cleaver to its full serrated length. He said nothing. He did not need to. His whole body said it. "The boy is mine to guard, and you are prey." Freed's mad eyes flicked from the deathless man to the bloody devil and back, calculating odds he suddenly didn't like. 2 on 1, is it? And one of you doesn't even bleed right. He licked his lips. Freed doesn't do bad odds. Freed does fun. And with a snarl he triggered Excalibur rapidly, and became a scream of white light, hurling himself not at them but away, between the containers and gone, his laughter trailing behind him like a bad smell. "Another night, freaks. I know where to find the little devil now." Then silence, and the dark, and the smell of blood and ozone. Kiba sank to one knee, one hand pressed to the smoking wound across his ribs. The hunter folded the cleaver and crouched beside him, and without a word produced from within his coat a slender vial of dark, glistening blood, a blood vial, the hunter's medicine, the thing that had knit him whole 1,000 times in 1,000 deaths. He held it out. Kiba stared at it. "What is that?" The hunter simply held it there, steady, waiting. Kiba took it. He didn't know why. Perhaps because a man who had just put himself between a knight and a holy blade had earned a moment's trust, and he did with it the only thing that made sense, pressing the vial to the wound and letting its dark contents seep in. The effect was immediate and strange, not the clean warmth of Asia's healing, but a fierce, coppery vitality that surged through him, closing the smoking gash, dragging him back from the edge of the poison. He gasped. The pain receded. The wound knit. "That's," Kiba flexed his side experimentally, disbelieving. "That's not holy healing. That's not devil magic. What is that?" The hunter did not answer, but the doll's earlier words seemed to hang in the dark between them anyway. He hunts with will, and blood is the medium of his craft. In Yharnam, blood had been everything. The plague, the cure, the sacrament, the poison. The hunter had waded through oceans of it. That he carried a devil back from a holy wound with the same dark craft that had raised beasts and hunters alike was a truth almost too large for the industrial dark to hold. Kiba got to his feet. For a long moment he looked at the silent man beside him, and the raw hatred that had driven him for a decade seemed, for the first time, to have something else standing beside it. "You didn't have to do that," Kiba said quietly. "Follow me. Stand between me and that thing. Heal me. I'm not your peerage. I'm not your friend. You don't owe me anything." His jaw worked. "Why?" The hunter looked at him for a long moment. And then, in a voice like rust and gravel, a voice none of them had heard him use, a voice that clearly cost him something to find, the hunter spoke. 6 words. The first 6 words he had said in this world. A hunter shouldn't hunt alone. Kiba went still. The hunter straightened and turned his weathered eyes on the boy, and something passed between them that neither the schoolhouse nor the sunrise had managed. One man who had drowned in an endless hunt, reaching a hand to another just beginning to drown. "That sword," the hunter went on, each word dragged up from long disuse, "made you. So you think killing it unmakes you back into whatever you were before. It doesn't." His gaze did not waver. "I've hunted my whole life for a night that ends. It doesn't end. You kill the thing you're hunting and there's another thing, and another. And the hunt is still there when the target's gone. Because the hunt was never really about the target." A pause. "Kill your holy sword, boy. I'll even help, but know what you're killing it for, or you'll finish your hunt and find out you were the beast the whole time." The words fell into the dark and lay there, heavy. Kiba stared at him. And whatever the night had expected, a stranger's indifference, a warrior's cold counsel, it had not been this. Not a weary, terrible compassion from a man who had walked the exact road ahead of him all the way to its bitter end, and come back to warn him off the ditch. "You've done it," Kiba said slowly. "Finished a hunt like mine, and it didn't. It didn't give me back the ones I lost," the hunter said. "Nothing does. That's the part they don't tell you." He turned toward the town. "Come on. Freed knows where the devil children sleep now. Your king should hear it from you before she hears it from a burning building." And he walked, and after a moment Kiba followed, no longer hunting alone. Rias heard the report in grim silence, and when Kiba finished, she looked at the hunter across the schoolhouse for a long, reassessing moment. "You stood between my knight and Excalibur," she said. "You didn't have to." "No," the hunter agreed. "And now you're telling me a rogue exorcist with a holy sword knows where my peerage sleeps, and that this is the same night I've had word from Sona that the fallen are massing." Her crimson eyes were hard and bright. "Kokabiel is moving. The stolen swords, freed, all of it. It's not separate threats. It's one hand closing." She rose. "He's going to hit Kuoh, soon. And when he does, he's going to do it in a way designed to drag in the church and the underworld both, and set the whole thing ablaze." "Yes," the hunter said. He had felt it coming for 4 nights. The held breath, the gathering. He did not tell her about the other thing. The tear above the forgotten shrine, the between place bleeding through, the second hunt with too many eyes. She had one fire she could see. He would not hand her a second she couldn't fight until he understood it himself. Rias looked at him, the deathless man who couldn't be turned, couldn't be read, and had just chosen, twice now, to stand with her people instead of apart. "When it comes," she said slowly, "which side are you on?" The hunter considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I'm on the side of the ones who don't burn towns," he said at last. "You haven't burned any yet." He looked toward the eastern window, toward the dark where the fire was gathering. "The fallen one wants a slaughter. I've spent my life ending slaughters." His hand settled on the cleaver. "That puts us on the same side, for now, long enough." It was not loyalty. It was not an oath. It was a hunter naming his prey, but in the fragile, frightened season Kuoh had entered, with holy swords loose and fallen wings gathering, and a war one madman's whim away. It was enough. And Rias, heir of Gremory, took the deathless killer's cold and narrow allegiance and was, for that night, grateful for it. Above a forgotten shrine, unwatched, the tear churned wider, and the too many eyes drew nearer, and the second fire the town could not see leaned closer to the thin place in the world. 2 hunts were coming. Only one of them had been invited. Kokabiel struck 3 nights later, and he struck at the school. He chose it deliberately. Kuoh Academy at midnight, emptied of its ordinary students, a stage set for the drama he'd been composing in his black stronghold for weeks. He came with a host of lesser fallen at his back, and cages of stolen holy swords and a grin full of teeth. And he brought the whole massing weight of his old rage down on the town, the way a man brings down a hammer on glass. A barrier snapped up around the school grounds, sealing the killing floor. The night sky above the academy turned the sick violet of a fallen angel's malice, and Kokabiel, 10 pitch wings spread wide, floated above the courtyard and laughed, because this was what he'd been made for and denied for far too long. Rias's peerage was there to meet him, and Sona Citries, and Zenobia with her Excalibur fragment, and the twin-tailed exorcist Arena beside her, the devils and the church standing together against a common enemy, exactly the alliance Kokabiel intended to drown in blood. Spears of light rained across the courtyard. Crimson power of destruction answered. Akino's holy lightning cracked the sky, and for all of it, they were losing, because Kokabiel was a cadre-class fallen angel, one of the oldest and strongest of his kind, and a handful of young devils and 2 exorcists were not nearly enough to stop him. He knew it. He was enjoying it. He was savoring the moment before the slaughter, when the hunter came over the wall. He came without announcement, without a battle cry, without the theater that every other combatant in that courtyard brought to the fight. He simply vaulted the barrier's edge where it met the school wall and dropped into the killing floor with the folded cleaver already in one hand and the blunderbuss in the other. And he began, immediately and without drama, to hunt. The first fallen angel he reached did not understand what was happening until it was over. It turned, light spear raised, and loosed the searing lance at point-blank range, and the spear struck the hunter square in the chest, and the hunter kept coming, because holy light is death to devils, and it was nothing at all to a man who was neither devil, nor holy, nor anything the fallen had a category for. The cleaver unfolded mid-stride into its great serrated length, and took the fallen angel apart in a single fluid arc, and the hunter was already moving to the next, before the first had finished falling. The courtyard's whole logic changed in an instant. Kokabiel stopped laughing. From above, the fallen angel watched the deathless man carve into his host, and his crimson eyes narrowed with the first real interest he'd shown all night. He had planned for the hunter. This was the weapon he'd meant to loose into the slaughter, the deathless knife he'd smiled about in his black stronghold. He had simply assumed the knife would cut indiscriminately, would kill devil and church and fallen alike in mindless hunger, would turn the battle into the formless massacre he needed. Instead, the knife had a mind, and the knife had chosen a side. "Interesting," Kokabiel murmured, and it was very nearly the same word Azazel had used, spoken with an entirely different appetite. "You think? I'd hoped you were just a beast." He gestured, and a dozen of his fallen peeled off the main assault and descended on the hunter in a converging cage of light spears. "No matter, a knife with opinions is still a knife. Let's see if you can be dulled." The light came from every direction at once. The hunter did what he had done in Yharnam, against odds far worse than this. He did not try to stop it. He flowed. He read the geometry of the incoming spears the way he read everything, and where he could not dodge, he simply took the hit and kept moving, blood vials disappearing into his coat and coming back out empty, the dark medicine knitting him faster than the light could carve him. A spear took him through the thigh. He dragged the leg forward and buried the cleaver in the fallen who'd thrown it. A spear burned across his back. He pivoted into it, and the blunderbuss roared and another fallen folded. He was hit again, and it should have been death 6 times over. And each time the wound closed. Each time he was simply still there, patient and relentless, wading through the light like a man walking upstream. The devils and the exorcists, fighting for their lives across the courtyard, saw it. And it did something to them, because there is a particular terror to fighting an enemy who cannot die, and there is a particular hope to fighting beside one. Issei, battered and bleeding near the far wall, watched the hunter take a killing blow and keep walking, and felt his own exhausted courage catch fresh flame. "He's not stopping," Issei breathed. He's not stopping. "Then neither do we," Zenobia roared, and drove Excalibur destruction into the fallen bearing down on her. The tide, which had been running out, began to turn. But Kokabiel had one more card, and he played it now, because he had never intended this to be a fair fight, and he was, at his black heart, a soldier who understood that battles are won by breaking the enemy's will before their bodies. "Enough of the small ones," he said, and descended. He came down into the courtyard like a falling mountain, 10 wings blotting the sick violet sky, and the sheer pressure of him, a cadre-class fallen angel, ancient and terrible, at full strength, drove the younger fighters back on their heels. He did not bother with the devils or the exorcists. He went straight for the hunter, because the hunter was the anomaly, the interesting thing, the knife that had refused to cut the way he'd wanted, and Kokabiel had decided he would very much enjoy finding out what it took to end something that couldn't be ended. "You," Kokabiel said, and his voice rolled across the courtyard like thunder in a crypt, "are the most amusing thing to fall into this world in 1,000 years, so I'll do you the honor I do almost no one." He raised a hand, and light gathered there, not a spear but a sun, a lance of holy power vast enough to level a district, the kind of attack that unmade raiding game arenas and crack the bones of the world. "I'll use everything." He loosed it. The lance of light took the hunter dead center, and the courtyard went white, and the sound of it was the sound of the sky tearing. When the light faded, there was a crater where the hunter had stood, glass slagged and smoking, and for a long, awful moment the entire battlefield held its breath, devils and exorcists and fallen alike, certain that they had just watched the deathless man meet the thing that finally killed him. Kokabiel smiled. There, even a knife that won't dull can be melted. And then, in the churning dark far above the school, at the edge of everyone's awareness but the very center of the hunters, something answered. Because the killing blow had done a thing Kokabiel could not have known to fear. The lance had not merely struck the hunter, it had struck the thin place, the residue of the between place that clung to him like a second shadow, the wound in reality he'd carried since he crossed, and that vast discharge of holy power, hammered into an already thinning veil, tore it the rest of the way open. Above the school, not above the shrine now, but here, over the killing floor itself, the sky split, and it did not split into stars. It split into eyes. The hunter woke in the crater. The dream had caught him. It always caught him. But this time the return was different, wrong, because the dream itself had felt the tearing of the veil and had spat him back not into the gray garden, but straight into his own smoking grave, gasping, whole, the dark blood already surging to knit the ruin the lance had made of him. He came up out of the crater on his hands and knees, and the first thing he saw was the courtyard full of frozen, staring faces. And the second thing he saw, when he lifted his eyes, was the thing in the sky. It hung above the school in the torn violet dark, vast and pale and impossible, a shape of too many limbs and too many eyes and a geometry that hurt to hold in the mind, a great one or something kin to one, leaning its incomprehensible attention through the wound in the world toward the bright new feast of a world it had never touched. Its regard fell across the courtyard like a physical weight, and every soul beneath it, devil, fallen, exorcist, staggered under a dread that had nothing to do with holy or demonic power, an older and colder terror, the terror of the small thing that has just been noticed by the enormous. Even Kokabiel faltered. Even the cadre-class fallen angel, who feared almost nothing in creation, looked up at the too many eyes and felt, for the first time in 1,000 years, the specific horror of an insect regarded by a god. "What," Kokabiel breathed, "is that?" The hunter rose from his grave. He did not look at the fallen angel. He looked at the thing in the sky, the thing his coming had let in, the second fire, the hunt he'd carried across the veil and told no one about. And behind the cloth of his mask, his weary eyes went hard and certain in a way they had not been all night. This was his prey, not the fallen angel with his old grudge. This, the thing from the between place, the thing that had followed the smell of a new world through the wound he'd made. He had brought it here, and a hunter cleans up his own hunts. He picked up the cleaver from the slagged glass. He touched a fresh blood vial to his arm, and in his rusted, long undozed voice, quiet enough that only the nearest fighters heard it, the hunter said the truest thing he had said since he'd come to this world. "That one's mine." Above him, the too many eyes turned, slowly, and fixed on the small, deathless thing that dared to look back, and the real hunt, the one no faction had a treaty for, finally began. For one held breath, the courtyard belonged to no war anyone had planned. Kokabiel hung in the torn violet air with his 10 wings spread, and his sun of holy light guttering half-formed in his hand, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the ancient fallen angel did not know what he was looking at. The devils had stopped fighting. The exorcists had stopped fighting. The fallen host had stopped fighting. Every combatant in that sealed killing floor stood frozen beneath the vast pale thing leaning through the wound in the sky, united at last, exactly as Kokabiel had schemed, and for exactly none of the reasons he'd schemed it, by the simple animal understanding that something had entered the board that made all their old grudges look like children squabbling over toys. "Azazel warned me," Kokabiel said, and there was a thin thread of something almost like laughter in it. The laughter of a man watching his own carefully built plan get eaten by something larger. "Not about this. He warned me the deathless thing didn't fit the rules." I thought he was being cautious. He looked down at the hunter, rising bloodied from his own grave in the crater. "You brought that with you?" "Yes," the hunter said. He did not elaborate. He had no time and less inclination. The thing in the sky was pouring its attention down onto the courtyard, and where that attention fell, the world curdled. The slagged glass of the crater rippled like water. The barrier walls wept a substance that was not water, and the lesser fallen nearest the wound in the sky began, quietly and horribly, to change, their forms softening and swelling and sprouting wrongness, as the between places influence rewrote them from the edges in. One of them opened a mouth that was suddenly too wide and made a sound that no throat should make. The nearest exorcist put a light spear through it out of pure reflexive horror. "It's infecting them," Rias said, her voice tight with a dread she was fighting to master. "The fallen closest to that thing, there," she couldn't finish. "The veil is thin here now," the hunter said, moving past her, cleaver in hand, eyes never leaving the sky. "What's on the other side is bleeding through. It touches your minds, your bodies, your world, and none of it was built to hold the touch." He said it flatly, a diagnosis delivered by the only physician in the room who'd seen the disease before. In my world, this is how it always started. A thin place, a curiosity from the other side, and then a city of beasts, and a night that didn't end. His grip tightened. It ends here, tonight, before it learns the shape of this world well enough to stay. It was Azazel who arrived then, because the governor of the fallen angels had been watching Kuoh's currents on his enchanted glass, and had seen the wound of uncolor at the school flare and then tear, and had crossed the distance in a heartbeat with Vali, a silver streak at his shoulder. He took in the courtyard in a single sweeping glance, the frozen armies, the thing in the sky, the changing fallen, the deathless man rising from a crater, and the scholar in him, and the soldier in him, reached the same conclusion in the same instant. "Kokabiel," Azazel said, not even looking at his wayward cadre, "we are going to finish our disagreement later. Right now, there is a great one's shadow leaning through a hole in my sky, and I would take it as a personal kindness if you'd stop trying to start a war long enough for us all to not be eaten." Kokabiel bared his teeth. For a moment the old rage warred visibly with the newer, colder fear, and the fear for once won. "This once," he ground out, "and only because I want to see what that is before I decide whether to kill you, Governor." Wonderful. A truce built on morbid curiosity. My favorite kind. Azazel's golden eyes found the hunter, and for all the horror overhead, the scholar's hunger flickered bright in them. "You're the impossible thing, the deathless one. I've wanted to meet you for a week." He nodded up at the wound in the sky. "And I'm going to guess, from the look on your face, that you're the only person in this courtyard who's fought one of those before." "I've never won," the hunter said, "but I've survived them." "That's not the same thing, and it's the only thing I have." He turned to Azazel, and there was a swift, cold economy to him now. A man who had done this before, laying out the ground for people who hadn't. "It isn't fully here. What you see in the sky is a shadow. It's attention reaching through the wound. It can't cross fully unless the wound opens wide enough, and every soul it touches, every creature it changes, widens it a little more. That's how it feeds itself through. So the first rule," he raised his voice enough for the whole courtyard to hear it, "don't let it take anyone. The changed ones aren't your enemies anymore. They're doors. Close them fast and clean, and grieve them later." Nobody argued. Even Kokabiel's fallen, even Zenobia and Irina with their holy blades, took the deathless man's word as law, because he was manifestly the only one who spoke the grammar of this new terror. "And the second rule?" Vali asked. The White Dragon Emperor's host had said nothing until now. He had simply stared up at the thing in the sky with an expression Azazel had never seen on him, something between hunger and awe, the look of a warrior who has spent his whole life searching for an opponent worthy of him, and has just felt the floor of the world drop out from under that search. "This," Vali's face said, "this is bigger than anything." "The second rule," the hunter said, "is that it doesn't die like you're used to. You can't outpower it. It has more power than this whole courtyard put together, and it isn't even properly here yet." He looked at Vali with something that might have been warning and might have been pity. "You want to hit it with everything you have. I can see it in you. Don't. Everything you have is a candle, and that's the dark. You don't fight the dark by being a brighter candle." His weathered eyes swept the assembled powers, Satan's sister and cadre fallen and dragon emperor alike. You fight it by closing the door it came through. And that is a hunt, not a war. Precision, not force. "And you know how to close it," Rias said. "I know how it's done in my world," the hunter said. "Insight. The wound is held open by attention. Its attention reaching in, and the town's attention drawn to it, fear feeding the tear. I can perceive the wound where it's thinnest, the seam it's leaking through, but I can't close it and hold off what's coming through at the same time." For the first time since he'd arrived, the deathless man asked something of them. "I need the wound guarded. I need everything that comes out of it put down before it can widen the tear. And I need one thing more that I don't have here." His jaw tightened behind the mask. "I need the doll." The doll was already coming. She had felt it from the schoolhouse, the tearing of the veil, the vast cold attention flooding into the world. Felt it the way she had once felt the turning of the blood moon. a resonance in the arcane substance of her being that no distance could mute. And she had done a thing she had never done in all her long existence. She had left the place she was meant to stay and walked out into a waking night, alone, toward the wound in the world. Asia found her at the school gate and would not be left behind. So they came together, the porcelain woman and the blonde healer, into a courtyard full of frozen armies and a great one's shadow in the sky. The hunter turned the instant she arrived, and something in the set of his shoulders eased by a fraction. The only tell, across the whole terrible night, that the deathless man had a thing in this world he was afraid to lose. "Good Hunter," the doll said, crossing the killing floor to him as though the horror overhead were merely weather. "You made the wound. When you crossed, you tore the thin place, and it has followed you here as it followed you always." There was no accusation in it, only the gentle, terrible clarity she had always offered him. "You knew, you have known for days, and you carried it alone, so that these children would have only one fire to fear instead of two." She reached up and laid a porcelain hand against the side of his blood-soaked face, an intimacy none of them had seen, and her pale eyes were full of a sorrow as old as he was. "You must stop doing that, carrying it alone. It is what has broken you, over and over, across every night. It is the one wound I have never been able to mend." The hunter was silent, but he did not pull away. "I can close it," the doll went on, softer. "The wound answers to the dream, and I am of the dream. The anchor, the resonance, the thing that catches you when you fall. What holds you also holds the seam. But I cannot fight, good hunter. I have never fought. I am not made for it." Her hand fell from his face. "So I will hold the wound and unmake it strand by strand, and it will take time I do not have unless someone buys it for me. And while I do it, I will be utterly defenseless, and the thing on the other side will feel me working, and will pour everything it has into stopping me." She turned her ageless gaze on the assembled powers of 3 factions. "I will need all of you. The one who cannot die will hunt what comes through, and the rest of you must keep a great one from a woman of porcelain, who has never once raised her hand against anything in all the years of the world." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Azazel began, quietly, to laugh, not at her, but at the sheer impossible shape of the alliance the night had forged. Devils, exorcists, the fallen, a Satan's sister, the white dragon emperor, a man who won't die, and a doll who's about to save the world, he said, wiping his eye. Surzex is never going to believe this report. He drew his own weapon, a blade of condensed light and shadow, and his golden eyes were suddenly, entirely serious. "Very well, Hunter. Tell us where to stand. We'll buy your doll her time." And Kokabiel, ancient, war-hungry Kokabiel, who had come to burn a peace and start a slaughter, looked up at the too many eyes leaning through his sky, and then down at the deathless man and the porcelain woman, and made the only choice that a soldier of his age could make when the truly enormous entered the field. "I always did want a war worth fighting," the cadre-class fallen angel said, and spread his 10 black wings, and turned to face the wound in the world. "Let's see if this one qualifies." The doll knelt in the center of the courtyard, and folded her porcelain hands, and began, strand by luminous strand, to close the door the Good Hunter had opened. And every power in Kuoh turned outward to guard her, as the first of the changed things came screaming out of the dark. They came out of the wound in waves, and the wound was generous. The first wave was the changed fallen, the ones the Great One's attention had already rewritten, their bodies swollen into wrongness, their wings gone to tatters of shadow, their mouths too wide. They fell on the courtyard shrieking, and the assembled powers met them in a ring of light and crimson and steel, and the hunter's first law held: close the doors fast and clean. Zenobia and Irina worked the eastern flank, their holy blades finding the changed with a mercy that looked like violence. Aquino's lightning walked the western wall in sheets of golden death. Koneko waded into the thickest press with her small fists cracking transformed bone, and Kiba was a blur of demonic steel beside her, and for once, the knight's blade was not swinging at a decade of grief, but at a thing genuinely worth killing. And at the center of it all knelt the doll, luminous and still, her porcelain hands folded and her pale eyes closed, unmaking the wound strand by strand. It was slow, It was agonizingly, impossibly slow. The doll worked the way a woman unpicks a knot she must not cut, because to cut the wound would be to leave a ragged hole that the between place could tear open again, and only a patient unweaving would truly close it. Each strand she unmade, the great one on the far side felt and answered, pouring more of itself through the narrowing gap, flinging change things and raw curdling influence at the woman dismantling its door. She did not flinch. She did not open her eyes. She simply held and unwove and trusted the deathless man and his impossible allies to keep the horror off her long enough to finish. How long? Rias called across the courtyard, cleaving a changed thing in half with a lance of power of destruction. Does she need? As long as it takes, the hunter said, so we give it to her. He was everywhere. The hunter did not hold a line. Lines were for armies, and he was not an army, he was a hunter. He ranged. Wherever the pressure grew worst, wherever a changed thing broke through the ring and lunged for the kneeling doll, the deathless man was suddenly there, the great cleaver arcing, the blunderbuss roaring, and the threat was simply gone. He took wounds that would have killed the whole courtyard combined and paid for them in blood vials, dying and rising and dying and rising, and every time he came back he was between the horror and the doll. Azazel fought near him, and even in the thick of it the governor could not stop studying, watching how the hunter read the battle, how he moved to the exact point of failure a half-second before it failed, how the dark blood knit him back from ruin again and again. You do this a lot, Azazel observed, driving his light blade through a changed fallen's throat. The dying, you're used to it. It's the job, the hunter said and reloaded. No wonder you're tired, Azazel said, and there was no mockery in it. Only unexpectedly, a kind of sorrow, the sorrow of a very old being, recognizing an exhaustion older than his own. 10,000 years I've lived, Hunter, and I have never once had to get used to dying. I don't think I'd have your steadiness if I did. He beheaded another changed thing. When this is over, if this is over, I would very much like to talk to you. Not to study you, to talk. There aren't many of us who've been tired this long. The hunter said nothing, but something in the set of his shoulders answered. The second wave was worse, because the second wave was insight. As the doll unwove the wound, the Great One's leaking attention grew desperate and concentrated, and it did the thing that had broken so many minds in Yharnam. It pressed directly on the perceptions of everyone in the courtyard, forcing them to truly see it, and to see the vast indifferent cosmos of which it was the smallest visible fingertip. This is the terrible edge of insight. To perceive the higher truth is to be unmade by it. Across the courtyard, fighters began to falter. A young fallen angel dropped his spear and clutched his head, screaming. One of Sona's peerage collapsed. Even Kiba staggered, his eyes going wide and glassy as the incomprehensible poured into a mind not built to hold it. Don't look at it, the hunter roared, the loudest anyone had heard him. But it was not a thing you could choose not to look at, because it was looking at you. And here, at last, the deathless man's terrible history became the courtyard's salvation. Because the hunter had lived in insight, he had drowned in it, night after night, until the truths that shattered lesser minds had become merely the weather he hunted in. He was, perhaps uniquely among every soul in that world, a being who could stand in the full regard of a great one and remain himself. And he did the only thing he could think to do. He stepped into the center of the courtyard, planted himself between the wound and the failing fighters, and drew the attention to himself. He raised his blood-slicked face to the too many eyes, and he did not look away. And he offered the vast cold thing the one prey in all this world that would actually look back. The Great One's attention swung toward him like a searchlight, and the pressure on everyone else eased, and the hunter took the full weight of a cosmos thing's regard alone. It should have unmade him. It unmade everything. It did not unmade him, because he had already been unmade, long ago, in a city of blood, and a thing already broken to the exact shape of this horror has nothing left for the horror to break. He stood in the searchlight of the infinite, and he was, simply, a hunter, the last and the best of them, who did not stop, who never stopped, whose only prayer was the hunt. And into the vast indifferent regard of the Great One, he sent back the only thing he had ever had to offer anything. I see you. I have seen worse. I am not afraid, because I stopped being able to be afraid 1,000 nights ago. Come down if you like. I'll hunt you too." The eyes in the sky recoiled. It was the smallest thing, a flinch in the infinite. But every soul in the courtyard felt it. The moment the enormous thing regarding them met a small deathless thing that regarded it right back without breaking, and drew away, uncertain, from prey that would not be afraid. "Now," the hunter said through his teeth, holding the vast attention on himself by main will alone. "Now, doll, close it. I can't hold this long." The doll opened her eyes. She had held the wound for what felt like an age, unweaving it strand by patient strand while the world burned around her. And now, with the Great One's attention wrenched away onto the Good Hunter, with the pressure lifted for one precious span of heartbeats, she found the last knot of the wound and set her porcelain hands upon it. "Good Hunter," she said, and though she spoke softly, her voice carried across the whole courtyard, into the terrible silence at the eye of the storm. "You have spent every night of your existence standing between the dark and everything you love, alone, and dying for it, and rising to do it again. You did it in Yharnam. You did it in the dream. You have done it here, in a world not your own, for children who feared you a week ago." Her pale hands began to glow, the last strands of the wound unraveling beneath them. "I have watched you do it 10,000 times, and I have never once been able to make it hurt you less. But I can do this. I can close the one door you should never have had to hold open." The wound in the sky shuddered. "Rest," the doll said, and it was not a command but a benediction, the thing she had said to him at the end of every night since the beginning. "Just this once, Good Hunter. Let me close the door. Let me be, for a moment, the one who stands between you and the dark." And she unmade the last strand. The wound in the sky did not tear or explode or collapse. It simply closed, the way a held breath finally releases, the too many eyes drawing back through a seam that grew narrower, and then was not there at all, and the torn violet sky knit itself back into the ordinary dark of an ordinary night over an ordinary town, and the vast cold attention was gone, cut off mid-regard, sealed on the far side of a veil made whole. The Great One's searchlight vanished from the hunter all at once, and the deathless man swayed where he stood, and for the first time in the entire battle, it was not blood loss or a killing wound that nearly took him down. It was the sudden, staggering absence of a weight he had been built to carry, the strange vertigo of a man who has braced against a door for 1,000 years, and felt it, at last, held by someone else. The courtyard fell silent. The changed things, cut off from the influence that had made them, dropped where they stood. The last echoes of the horror faded from the air, and the assembled powers of 3 factions, devils and fallen and exorcists, a Satan's sister and a cadre-class fallen angel, and the White Dragon Emperor, stood in the sudden ordinary quiet and understood, slowly, that they had just survived a thing that should have ended their world, and that they had survived it together, and that a porcelain woman who had never raised her hand against anything had just closed the door that a man who could not die had held. Valley Lucifer looked up at the healed and ordinary sky, and there was something almost like grief in the White Dragon Emperor's face, the grief of a warrior who had glimpsed, for one night, an opponent truly worthy of him, and watched it sealed away forever behind a mended veil. "I want to fight that," Valley said quietly, "to no one. Someday, something that big." He shook his head slowly. "There's no point to any of it, if the biggest things are always just out of reach." "There's every point," Azazel said, coming to stand beside his wayward pupil, watching the hunter sway in the center of the emptying courtyard, while the doll rose and went to him. "The point is right there. Look, he held the biggest thing in creation off a whole courtyard, and the only thing that made him stumble was letting someone help him carry it." The governor's golden eyes were soft and old. "The big things aren't the point, Valley. They were never the point. That is." The wound was closed. The war was not quite over. Because Kokabiel was still Kokabiel, and when the too many eyes vanished from the sky, and the ancient terror lifted, the cadre-class fallen angel stood in the emptying courtyard, and felt the old thing come flooding back into the space the fear had briefly cleared. The rage, the grievance, the hunger for the war he'd been denied. He had fought beside devils and exorcists tonight. He had taken orders from a doll. He had felt small beneath the infinite, and Kokabiel had spent 10,000 years making sure he never felt small. He hated it. And hate, in a being that old and that strong, does not simply evaporate because the sky healed. "Well," Kokabiel said, and the word dropped into the exhausted silence like a stone into still water. 10 black wings spread once more across the courtyard. That was educational. His crimson eyes swept the assembled fighters, battered, drained, half-collapsed after holding off a great one, and a slow, terrible smile spread across his face as he did the math that a soldier always does. "But it seems to me that we're all very tired now, and the peace Azazel loves so much is still standing, and I still want it gone." Azazel's exhaustion vanished. "Kokabiel, don't. You spent the whole night telling me to set aside my war for the greater good," Kokabiel said, and the light began to gather in his hands again. Not a spear now, but that district-leveling sun, the attack that had nearly ended the hunter. "And I did. I'm a reasonable creature, whatever you think, but the greater good is handled. The sky is mended, and now everyone who could stop me is on their knees." He raised the gathering sun of light above the courtyard, above the kneeling, exhausted fighters, above the doll who had spent everything closing the wound and had nothing left. "I'll take Sir Zex Lucifer's little sister's head as a start. Let the underworld and the church tear each other apart over who's to blame. This is still my war, Governor. It was only ever paused." He loosed the sun. It fell toward Rias, toward the heir of Gremory, drained and defenseless in the center of her exhausted peerage, a lance of holy annihilation, vast enough to erase her and everyone near her from the world. Issei threw himself in front of his king with his gauntleted arm raised and a scream of defiance, and the certain knowledge that it would not be enough. And the hunter was there first. He should not have been able to move. He had held a great one's regard alone. He was as drained as any soul in the courtyard. But the hunter had spent his entire existence learning to move when moving was impossible. To stand between the dark and the ones behind him one more time, when there was nothing left to stand with. And he crossed the courtyard in the space between heartbeats and put himself directly beneath the falling sun. And this time, he did not simply take it. Because the hunter had been watching Issei's gauntlet since the first night, the low ember of something ancient sleeping inside it, the old red thing curled in slumber that his insight had marked and filed away. And in the instant before the sun struck, the hunter did a thing that no one, least of all Issei, expected. He seized the boy's gauntleted arm, and with the last of his strength, and the whole terrible authority of a hunter who had commanded blood his entire life, he woke the ember. "Boost," said a voice from the gauntlet, deep, ancient, amused, the voice of the Red Dragon Emperor stirring in his host, and the green jewel flared. The hunter had felt it that first night in the crimson-lit street, an old dragon sleeping in a boy's arm, a power that doubled and doubled and doubled. Issei had never been able to reach it at will, not consistently, not under pressure, but the hunter did not ask it to double Issei. The hunter, who understood blood and power and the transfer of both, the way no one in this world did, took Drake's boost, and, through a grip slick with his own dark blood, through the arcane resonance that clung to a man of the dream, poured it into himself. "Well now," said Drake, intrigued, from the gauntlet, "that's new." The hunter met the falling sun with the cleaver raised in both hands, and a hunter's power doubled by a dragon's boost, and he cut it. The blade sheared into the descending lance of annihilation, and the courtyard went white, and the sound of it was the sound of a mountain splitting, and when the light cleared, the sun of holy power was halved, cloven clean down its center by a serrated blade, its two dying halves scattering harmlessly into the night sky on either side of the boy and his king. Silence. Kokabiel stared, 10 wings frozen mid-beat, at the deathless man standing in the wreckage of his ultimate attack, with a boy's dragon light still crackling green up his arm. "Impossible," Kokabiel breathed. "That was impossible." "No," the hunter said, and his rusted voice was very quiet and very final. "That was a hunt. He came for Kokabiel then, and the fallen angel, for all his 10,000 years, for all his cadre-class might, met a thing he had no answer for. Because the hunter was drained, yes, but the hunter had a dragon in his corner now, and the hunter did not fight the way anything in this world fought. Kokabiel threw spears of light, and the hunter walked through them, dying and rising, the dark blood knitting him faster than the fallen could carve. Kokabiel called up walls of holy fire, and the hunter came through them wreathed in flame, and did not slow. And every 10 seconds, quiet and merciless from the gauntlet the hunter now fought beside, the Red Dragon Emperor's voice, boost. And the hunter grew stronger, and stronger, and stronger, a mortal man escalating toward the god-slaying tier on borrowed dragonlight, and his own bottomless refusal to stop. Issei watched it, dazed, his own arm gone quiet as the hunter carried the boost. He's using Deadreg. He's fighting with me, kind of, he asked. Dreg rumbled, sounding for all the world entertained. In his way. First one in a long while who could. Let him work, partner. I want to see how this ends. It ended the way hunts end. The hunter got inside Kokabiel's guard, a cadre-class fallen angel, ancient and terrible, driven back step by step by a tired man with a saw and a dragon's blessing, and the great cleaver came down, and Kokabiel's 10 wings scattered black feathers across the courtyard as the fallen angel who had wanted to burn the world went down beneath a hunter who simply would not be stopped. The hunter did not kill him. He pinned him, blade to throat, boost still crackling green, and held the ancient warmonger there in the wreckage of his war. You, Kokabiel rasped, staring up at the deathless eyes above the mask, could have killed me. Why? Because your governor wants his peace, the hunter said. And I've buried enough worlds to know a peace worth keeping when I finally see one. He leaned down, and his voice went low and cold. But if you come for these people again, the boy, the girl, the doll, I'll hunt you across every night you have left. And I have all the nights, fallen. I never run out. He pressed the blade a fraction closer. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You can't win. Not because you're weak. Because I don't stop. Ever. That's the whole of it. Kokabiel looked into the eyes of the one being in creation that could genuinely make good on that threat. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the ancient fallen angel believed a mortal completely. I understand, Kokabiel said. Azazel arrived at the hunter's shoulder, and with a gesture bound his wayward cadre in chains of light and shadow. I'll take him from here, the governor said quietly. There'll be a reckoning. A proper one, before the factions, in the light. He looked at the hunter with an expression that had gone entirely past study into something like reverence. You just stopped a war, Hunter. 2 of them, counting the sky. Do you have the faintest idea what you've done for the peace we've all bled for? The hunter released Kokabiel and stepped back, and the green dragon light faded from his arm as Dreg's boost finally guttered out, and the terrible drained weariness came flooding back into the deathless man all at once. He swayed. And the doll was there. Of course she was there. She was always there, catching him as she had caught him 10,000 times before, easing him down to kneel in the wreckage of the courtyard while the exhausted powers of 3 factions looked on. You woke the dragon, the doll said softly, wonder threading her gentle voice. You have never in all your existence borrowed another's strength. You have always hunted alone, with only what was yours. And tonight, you took a boy's dragon, and an enemy's peace, and a whole courtyard of strangers, and you made them yours, and you did not carry it alone. Her porcelain hand rested against his masked face. You are changing, Good Hunter. This waking world is changing you. I do not yet know into what. A pause, and something almost like hope in her ageless eyes. But for the first time since your making, I do not think it is changing you for the worse. The hunter knelt in the ruins, drained past speech, a dragon's echo fading from his blood and a doll's hand against his face, and a courtyard full of former enemies standing down around him, and above him, the ordinary sky held its ordinary stars, the wound sealed, the war ended, the peace, fragile, absurd, hard won, still standing. For the first time in 1,000 nights, the Good Hunter closed his eyes and did not brace for the dark. Dawn came to Kuoh again, and this time the doll was not the only one who watched it. They gathered on the school roof in the pale gold light. The strange, impossible alliance the night had forged, 2 wrung out to be enemies, and 2 changed to be strangers. Rias and her peerage, Sona and hers. Zenobia and Irina, holy blades sheathed. Azazel, with a bound and silent Kokabiel already sent ahead to face the reckoning of three factions. Vali, apart as always, staring east at nothing, and at the center of it, the hunter, sitting with his back against the roof's low wall, and the doll beside him, watching the sky do the beautiful thing it did. So, Azazel said, settling down beside the hunter with the easy familiarity of a man who had decided, somewhere in the night's blood, that this was a friend. The reckoning. Sergix is coming. The Satan himself, Rias's brother, to sort out what happened here. Kokabiel's war, the Excaliburs, the peace. And a certain deathless man who cut a cadre class fallen in half and closed a great one out of the sky. His golden eyes were shrewd. He's going to want to know what to do with you, Hunter, which means you get to decide what you want to be in this world. That's a rare thing. Most of us never get the choice. The hunter was quiet for a while, watching the sunrise. In my world, he said at last, in the rusted voice that was coming easier now, there was only ever the hunt. You hunted, or you became the thing that got hunted. There was no third door. I looked for one for a very long time. I never found it. He turned his weathered eyes on the governor. You people have a peace. It's thin and it's stupid, and half of you don't even want it. But it's a third door. I've never seen one before. A pause. I'd like to help you keep it. Azazel smiled. Not a devil then? Not a fallen, not a churchman. Not anyone's peerage. No. The hunter looked at the assembled powers, at the crimson devils and the holy exorcists, and the fallen governor, all of them watching him with a wary new respect. Just a hunter. Yours when the dark things come, and there'll be more, now that the veil knows the way. I made that wound. More may come through the thin places before they fully heal. That's a hunt that isn't finished. His hand rested on the folded cleaver. So I'll stay. I'll hunt what shouldn't be here. And when your peace needs a thing that can't die standing in front of it, you'll know where I am. An independent, Rias said, and there was approval in it. A hunter of the spaces between. The factions have never had one of those. She smiled, tired and genuine. My brother is going to find you fascinating. And deeply inconvenient. It's a good combination. Issei found the hunter before the others dispersed, and hovered, and finally blurted out the thing he'd been holding all morning. You used Drogue, he said. Last night. You woke him up when I couldn't, and you cut a Satan's attack in half with my dragon. How? I've been trying to control that power for weeks, and I can barely make the jewel light up. The hunter looked at the boy for a long moment. Because you're afraid of it, he said simply. You reach for it when you're scared, and scared hands slip. He nodded at the gauntlet. That dragon isn't a weapon you point. It's a partner you ask. I've spent my whole life asking blood to do things it doesn't want to do. You learn to ask like you mean it, and mean it like there's no version of the world where you get told no. He held Issei's eyes. You've got a good reason to be strong, kid. I watched you throw yourself in front of your king with nothing but your own body when you thought you were about to die. That's the whole of it. Right there. You don't need to be less afraid. You need to want to protect them more than you're afraid. The rest is just practice. He's right, you know. Drogue rumbled from the gauntlet, dry and amused. I've been telling you that for weeks, partner. Maybe you'll listen when a man who can't die says it. Issei stared at his own arm, then at the hunter, and something settled in the boy's face, a resolve older than he'd worn a night ago. Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, okay. He grinned, suddenly, the irrepressible thing coming back up through the exhaustion. Does this mean you'll train with me? Because that would be incredibly cool, and also Rias would let me if I... Ask the dragon first, the hunter said. He's the one who has to live in your arm. Absolutely not, said Drogue with feeling, and Issei laughed, and for a moment the roof was full of something that had been in very short supply all night, an ordinary, human warmth. The doll and Asia watched the sunrise together at the roof's edge, a little apart from the rest, the way they had watched the first one a week before. You're staying, Asia said. It wasn't quite a question. We are staying, the doll agreed, for as long as this world has need of the Good Hunter, and perhaps a while after, because I find, she paused, and turned the words over with the care of a being discovering them new, I find that I do not wish to leave. There is a sky here that changes, There is tea I do not need but am given anyway. There is a girl who told me, on my first morning, that there was a me underneath what I was made for. Her pale eyes met Asia's, and warmth moved through the porcelain calm of her face. I have spent the whole of my existence being what I was fashioned to be, his comfort, his keeper, the thing that catches him when he falls. I did not know I could also simply be a friend, be someone who watches a sunrise because it is beautiful, be a person, small and free, in a bright ordinary world. A pause. You gave me that word, Asia Argento, free. I think I am beginning to understand it. Asia's eyes shone, and she reached out and took the doll's cool porcelain hand in both of hers, and neither of them said anything else, because nothing else needed saying. Behind them, the hunter watched the two of them at the roof's edge, the porcelain woman who had spent 10,000 years catching him, learning, at last, to be caught by a bright new world. And behind the cloth of his mask, something in the deathless man's weathered face eased that had not eased in longer than he could remember. He had come to this world seeking only an echo and a place to be tired. He had found a war and a wound of his own making, and a fallen angel's grudge and a great one in the sky. He had found devils who ran a high school and a boy with a dragon in his arm, and a governor as tired as himself. And he had found, improbably, in a town that had every reason to fear him, a third door, a peace worth keeping, a reason to hunt that was not the endless grinding hunger of a night that would not end, but something smaller and warmer and infinitely harder to hold. These people, this town, this bright, ordinary, beautiful, changing world. The sun climbed over the rooftops of Kuoh, gold and rising, and the Good Hunter sat on the roof of a devil's schoolhouse, with a dragon boy laughing beside him, and a doll learning to be free, and a fragile, absurd peace standing all around him. And for the first time in the whole of his long and bloody existence, he was not waiting for the dark to come. He was simply watching the light. The reckoning came, as reckonings do. Surzek's Lucifer arrived to a Kuoh already healing, and heard an impossible report about a deathless hunter and a doll who closed the sky, and did precisely what Rias had predicted, found the whole affair fascinating and deeply inconvenient in equal measure. Kokabiel faced the judgment of 3 factions for his war. The fragile peace, which should have shattered a dozen times over that night, instead came out of it stronger, welded together in a courtyard where devils and fallen and exorcists had stood back to back against something that made all their old grudges look like children's games. And the hunter stayed, an independent power, sworn to no faction, keeper of the thin places, the thing that stood between a bright, ordinary world and the dark that would come leaking through the wounds he'd opened. There would be more hunts. The veil remembered the way now, and the spaces between are patient. But he would not hunt them alone. Not anymore. He had a dragon boy to train, and a governor to trade tiredness with, and a doll learning, one sunrise at a time, what it meant to be free. Far out in the dimensional gap, where great red wheels through the churning dark and Ophis coils in her endless silence, something vast turned a fraction of its infinite attention toward a small mended world where a hunter had briefly stared down one of its distant kin, and did not, yet, look away. But that is a hunt for another night. For now, the sun rose over Kuoh, and the peace held, and the Good Hunter watched the light.